Greetings, fellow barbarians. It is I, Alan Odinson, and you are listening to the Barbarian Lounge podcast. Today we got a pretty interesting show, a topic that I enjoy talking about. I'm sure all of you guys love to talk about it too. We're going to be talking about the world of Bladecraft. Yes, we're talking knives today, my friends. But let's get a few things out the way real quick. If you have not subscribed to our website yet, please do so. You can find us at thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com. Give us a subscription there, and you can be the first to get all the content as it becomes available. Also, I want to thank our sponsor, Mitacon. Mitacon, you can check them out online, mitaconusa.com. You can check them out there. I'll post a link to it on the website. I know they just got their new site up and running because they have got that product kicked off, and it is just amazing. Mitacon is absolutely amazing. It's not a pre-workout drink. It is a drink that activates the mitochondria on the cellular level. It is amazing. Helps you stay focused. I always take it before I work out, take it after I work out, and also before I do any archery training or martial arts training. It helps me just to really focus on what I'm doing. That's why I have a glass right here, because I need to stay focused talking to you people. Also, you can also check out the Barbarian Lounge on Facebook. Find the Barbarian Lounge podcast on Facebook. Give us a like there. We post a lot of articles and stuff there, and it's an easy way to keep track of us, especially if we're going to be on other shows, which we were just recently on a show, the Primer Time Radio on UCY.TV, which brings me to our show. Yes, we are on the network. A network has picked up this show. Can you believe it? UCY.TV. Find the Barbarian Lounge there. We're on every Tuesday night from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, we are prime time, baby. So check us out there on UCY.TV and follow the Barbarian Lounge there. Usually there's a chat room open. I try to get in there every time I can as the show is running so I can interact with the fans of the show in real time. So, we're talking the world of Bladecraft. We're talking knives, my friends. I love blades. I've been a quote-unquote knife guy for as long as I can remember. I still got one of the very first knives that my dad bought me. It was a old school little small Bowie knife, like an old-timey Bowie knife or something like that. Very, very small, not your classic big honking Bowie knife, but I've still got that thing, and I've still got the scar on my finger where it cut me when I was a kid. My dad said, "You better be careful," because he put a nice sharp edge on it. My dad was like a master at sharpening even the worst knives in the world. He could get them so sharp. And he had sharpened this blade for me, and I was just cutting things away, and he's like, "You better be careful, better be careful." And guess what? Pop, right on the top of my index knuckle on my right hand, I chopped myself across the hand and just peeled it open nice and good. So, yeah, kids, listen to your dad when he tells you not to be playing with your knives. But let me tell you this. I've said this before. As I'm recording this, I'm sporting on my left index finger a nice 1/4 inch deep cut on my index finger, along with a bunch of other scars on that hand. Let me tell you, one of my rules, Odinson's rules, remember this. If a guy tells you that he is a quote-unquote knife guy and he has perfect fingers, he is not to be trusted. Always remember that. There's no knife guy I know worth his weight that does not have lots of scars on his hands, forearms, you name it. That's just the name of the game. So, talking the world of Bladecraft, there's a lot of different knives out there. People are always asking me about different styles, different types of knives. What should I get, Odinson? I don't know what to get. Well, that's really kind of dependent on you, but we're going to talk about some of those different styles later. But for the purpose of this show, I am talking about blades that we would use in a fighting application, a fighting blade. I don't want to use the term defensive because, make no mistake about it, if you have to pull your blade, there's not going to be anything defensive about what you're doing. is an absolute offensive movement. It's the same with drawing your handgun. If you draw your handgun, it's not defensive. Well, maybe for the courts or for the cops it's defensive. But in its application, it is absolutely an offensive move. You are getting that blade or that firearm into play, and you are neutralizing the threat in an offensive manner. You are not on the defensive. You immediately move into the offensive manner. Because what happens when you move yourself into the offensive manner? Your opponent is now on the defensive, and you flip the bill on them. As the guys at SIOC would say, they would call it being the feeder, and I love that terminology. I'm not affiliated with any sort of group. I'm not affiliated with any of the guys out there. I'm kind of a Ronin, if you will, of the knife world. I like a lot of different styles. There's a lot of good things I like about styles, a lot of bad things I like about other styles as well. But it's very, very important to know the type of blade that you're getting. Know your knife. It has to be something. If you ever watch a knife guy and they always want to get that blade in their hand, and it's about a feel. When you get that feel, some guys like that, like the synthetic feel. Some guys like a cord wrap feel. Some guys like that wood handle because it's alive in your hand. I understand that from an energetic standpoint. But also there's a balance issue and how it feels, how it moves. So a lot of different things. Knife guys are very interesting. When I was at Blade Show, being a knife guy, it was kind of interesting to be around other guys similar to me that just had that feel for blades. And all you saw was guys picking that blade up and they're going into stabbing forms and cutting X's and everything. They wanted to get that feel. And that is very, very important. But you have to understand the type of blade you have, what the blade is used for, before you really go about employing it. For example, there are some blades that are designed for chopping. There's this, like a kukri. The kukri, big curved blade, heavy at the end, designed for a chopping cut, a deep penetrating chopping cut. Can you thrust with it? Yes, you can. I've seen people thrust with a kukri. It's not ideal for it. It's not what it's made for. It's made to take off limbs. Whether those limbs be wooden limbs or fleshy limbs, the kukri is designed for that. I used to hear stories about the Gurkhas in Nepal. They would jump out of trees with their kukri. I think they said this was in Vietnam. I could be incorrect. I'm almost positive of this story, how I heard it was in relation to Vietnam. But the Gurkhas would sit up in the trees, and as the North Vietnamese would walk under, they would jump out of the tree and come straight down with the kukri across around the clavicle area and just get a complete diagonal cut almost down to mid-portion of the torso. Just an unbelievable chopping weapon. The kukri is just an amazing blade. I have one made by Cold Steel. A lot of my blades are Cold Steel, and I'll talk about that later. But I have several kukris. They're just phenomenal blades, very thick. Just when it comes to hacking a limb off, that is exactly what that blade is designed to do. But there's certain blades that are better for thrusting, certain blades that are better for cutting. So if you've got, say, the old Fairbairn Sykes British Commando knife, that's not a blade you're going to be slashing with. That blade was designed for one purpose, to stab in between the third and fourth rib and get it right in there and hit those vitals to finish them off very quickly. Very quiet kill, thrusting it into the kidneys. I remember a story talking about blades. When I was growing up, I used to hang around gun shops with my dad. And you get some interesting guys that hang around in gun shops. If you ever hung around gun guys, it gets pretty interesting. But I remember there was this little old man in there, and I saw this guy, and he was like, it looked like somebody's grandpa. You know, he doesn't look threatening the least bit. Well, apparently this guy had served in Vietnam, and he used to talk about how sneaking up behind sentries, and they would have their blade, and they would grab the sentry around the neck and stab him into the kidney. And said the pain and hitting that nerve cluster and the pain that's involved. If you've ever had any shots to the kidney, punches to the kidney, had kidney stones, you know how painful it is. Now picture that with a blade inserted in there. But he said that you could grab him around the neck, thrust into that kidney, and said the pain was so bad they couldn't even make a sound. They couldn't even scream. Didn't even have to cover their mouth. It was just kind of a dry wheeze as they bled out there. Just a horrible, horrible thing. I always said that kidney shots are some of the worst ever, and that goes with knowing anatomy as well, which we're going to talk about that later as well. When it comes to anatomical shots, there's not a whole lot of things that hurt worse than kidneys. I remember one time when I was in school, I had this kid that they slapped me and went to run away, and as he was running, I was chasing him, and I managed to punch him at like a 45-degree angle downward into his kidney, and he dropped like a ton of bricks, and he didn't, and I guess this old man wasn't lying, because this kid didn't make a sound. He just kind of made a dry as he was writhing around on the ground. So I would say that this guy was absolutely correct. So knowing your blade, knowing your design, the design is going to dictate the use. Push daggers only have so many functions, even though there's some very sharp ones out there. So knowing the design, some blades are better for piercing through flesh, piercing through armor. We'll talk about a little bit about that later. But blade work has went through a lot of evolutions over the years, and there's a lot of things we can pick up from that. If you look around like the Greek-Roman times, there was a heavy emphasis on thrusting. Now that could be it could be the relation to ease of learning. It's very easy to teach someone to thrust straight out, or that infamous, if you're in the Filipino martial art world, that number 5, that straight thrust out. That's how I learned it. Probably some Filipino martial art, oh, that's not right, I don't know. That's how I learned it. I learned it, that is the number 5. So if you don't like that, go fuck yourself. So straight out that number 5, you got that number 5 shot. Well, it's a very easy thing to learn. I mean, think about most attacks that happen where guys get killed. It's from a lot of, tons of punctures. Stab, 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 stab. You watch any street encounters where a guy, he's not a trained killer. He may, but in most cases they don't really know what they're doing, so they just boom, boom, sewing machine, just punch as many holes in the bucket as you can, leak all the fluid out. That's mostly what these guys are going for. If they hit something vital in the process, well, great. But most of the time, all these guys are looking for is to put holes in the bucket. So if you look at like the Roman times, Romans, they had that shield, they had that Roman phalanx system, and they would push with the shield, thrust with the blade, push with the shield, thrust with the blade. And it was almost like a giant lawnmower of people who were just thrusting away as they marched forward. Of course, this was great with the shield. This was great as a unit. It had a great advantage in the fact that you could take that gladius, that Roman gladius, which I also own one of those. You could take that gladius and just thrust it just as deep as you can, through and through out the other side. If you go straight down the middle, you're going to be hitting that abdominal aorta running straight down. If you hit a little lower, you get that descending abdominal aorta, and you just get horrendous bleeding. It's a quick kill. They're not going to last very long. If you get deep enough, you pierce the spine, you'll drop them right where they're at. So there's a lot of advantages to that. The problem with the thrusting attack is it's only one style of attack. Now you can cut with a gladius. In most cases, they had an edge. It wasn't like a razor edge. You have to think, these blades were clanging. They weren't made of high quality material like we have now. It was kind of an assembly line as these things were made, the old school assembly line. But for the most part, they were just thrusting attacks, so you can kind of get an idea of how those thrusting attacks are coming. They're either coming straight, or they're going to be coming at a horizontal, or at some sort of upward diagonal. You have backhand shots, backhand diagonal shots, and backhand thrust. Not very common. You would see most people, you see a lot of that in the Filipino martial arts world, but for the most part, if you need to teach people something quick, simple, and efficient, it's what I've heard the Dog Brothers refers to as the caveman strikes. So it's basically just forehand strikes. If you're right-handed, you're clubbing downwards, you're clubbing at an angle, you're clubbing horizontal. Those are pretty much the angles you're going to get, and with thrusting, you run into the same thing. So if you watch a lot of knife attacks, it's usually on the street now, you get that body, body, throat, throat, body, body, throat, throat kind of attack. They either coming straight or they're coming at forehand strikes, that horizontal strike. Not a lot of backhand work. So it is limited. They were limited to that sort of attack. You also had the katana, that style blade. The katana was great for slashing naturally. It was a longer blade, but the point was specifically designed for piercing armor. Samurai armor was surprising. These guys did not have shields. They considered it a matter of dishonor to bring a shield into combat. You were pretty cowardly. You weren't really willing to face your death. When we do some episodes on Musashi, we'll talk about that a little more. But so they had very good armor. But a lot of the strikes used by the katana and blades of that nature were designed specifically for that sort of armor, the weak spots on the armor, where they could get that power diagonal cut or that piercing thrust. The blade, the point on a katana was specifically designed to be very good at piercing armor. Of course, the katana was a two-handed weapon. Musashi was an exception to that. He did use, a lot of times, actually, if you research it, Musashi actually used a wooden sword in a lot of his duels, which is actually pretty amazing, even if the other guy was using a real weapon. But Musashi was known for using two swords, and there are advantages to that, and we'll talk about that later on as well with the two-blade system. But of course, then you had your long sword, which you had a thrust and chopping, two-handed. Those are more of a war-style sword. You also had the eventual evolution, which is very interesting, is this evolution towards a rapier design. The rapier, the long thrusting weapon. And it was basically, this kind of come from the dueling world. It wasn't used a lot in warfare because you needed to have a more versatile weapon. But for dueling, these guys come up, eventually the evolution made it to the point where they said, you know what? It would be much better if we could stab each other from a long way off so we couldn't get stabbed. That makes a lot of sense if you think about it. I've always kind of scoffed at the martial art. If you see a knife style, there's some knife styles out there that you see when you see the guys sparring, blade on blade, which we're going to talk about that too. A lot of people, there's no such thing as blade on blade. Bullshit. We'll talk about that later. But if you see guys sparring with knives, and you see both of the guys move into each other, and both of them stab each other, then back away, what sort of victory is that? That is the worst kind of victory. Okay, well, we'll see which one of us can clock the quickest. That's not an idea of a style. Why am I even coming to you to learn anything? Maybe I learned to stab in a better spot than you? I mean, it makes no sense. I've never understood that in knife styles. Two guys, they're like, oh, we train in such and such knife styles. Like, okay, cool. And they're like, all right, we're going to spar. And they both run up each other and stab, 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 then they back up. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? You're both going to die. So we'll see which one of you clots the quickest, and maybe we can get the other guy to the ER. It's absolutely idiotic. The idea behind martial arts is you have the best way I've heard it described. Martial art, the martial is the war, the fighting, the violence aspect. That's the martial portion, which that's great. When two guys run up to each other and they stab each other and back away, well, guess what? That's the martial aspect of it. Yes. The art aspect is being able to apply your craft and not have it applied to you. That's the difference. That's the whole reason for learning a martial art, is to move yourself to an advanced level to where you can apply your craft and the other person can apply theirs. That's why it always gets me when guys talk about karate. They watch some of the guys in the UFC in MMA who are using karate styles. They're like, oh, he's just running. No, dumbass, he's not getting hit. He's hitting the other guy and he's moving away and he's not getting hit. It's not my fault that the other guy can't catch him. So it's the same way with blade arts. You have these guys that their idea is just to run into each other, stab, 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 then they back up, and it's like, well, let's see which one of us clots the quickest. No, that's idiotic. And people started realizing that you had different styles, you had different schools of thought. The Italians, you had the Spanish with their destreza. I love the angle use and the geometry used in destreza. Very, very interesting if you ever look into it. It's hard to find the good manuals. But basically, long story short, the evolution moved to where these guys realized that it's best to be able to attack people and not be attacked yourself. That's actually one of the things that was great about the Spanish destreza in the rapier styles, was the fact that they used the angles and footwork to not get caught in this game of a double kill, which the Italian system, I have heard instances where a lot of those duels ended in a double kill. Doesn't do us any good if we both die. We're just basically playing a game of chance. I don't want a game of chance. I want to win. I want to go home tonight. So when you had your knife styles start to develop here in the U.S., you basically had these guys using, they were using shorter blades because the sword got moved out where people started carrying pistols. So you had blades such as the Bowie knife. And one of the first martial arts schools in the United States was the use of the Bowie knife. And it was based off of a lot of fencing motions. And we've moved far away from that with the Filipino martial arts today. But I actually, oh my God, my Filipino martial arts friends are going to get so pissed off. I actually think that the old school Bowie fencing systems is a little bit more superior. I know, oh man, here comes the hate mail. These guys are like, fuck this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But in my experience, doing blade on blade work, that's what I found. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So when we're discussing the art of the blade in general, we're looking at basically, we've got 9 different things that really make up the art of the blade for me. And of course, I'm sure there's a lot of different people who will disagree and everything, and that's great. If we all agreed, life wouldn't be any fun. And this has been my experience. Now, what is my experience? I do have an experience in the Filipino martial arts. I trained with Sifu Mark Mills out of the Columbia Martial Arts Training Center. It was the same place that I trained my shoot wrestling and Muay Thai and Wing Chun when I first started out martial arts. He taught Kali there, and we learned stick work, blade work, empty hand. A lot of different stuff was involved in that. And I didn't go way up in the system. As I said in my martial mastery episode, my instructor did not hand out rank. That was just something he did not believe in, and I'm cool with that. But I trained in it for several years, trained in several other knife arts, picked up some things across the years, did some sword work in my Aikido days. He actually had us do some kenjutsu, some sword work, which was actually pretty cool. I find a lot of things beneficial in that. So I've done a good bit of blade sparring with other people. And like I said, my blade work is very, very eclectic. I've picked up bits and pieces from a lot of different things. But I have found through my experience using more of a long-range fencing type of style for blade work works better for me. I don't have a ridiculously long reach, but there's a lot of different things that work better for me. Now, granted, there's a lot of people listening to this saying, well, nobody does blade-on-blade work in real life, and if a guy attacks you on the street, you know, you're not, yeah, we're going to talk about that. So let's get into the 9 different aspects that I found in blade work. The art of the blade. So number 1, thrust are superior to cuts. That's probably making some people's heads explode already. But if you go statistically wise, most people die. If they die from a blade attack, they die from stabs and thrusts, not being cut. Can you die from a cut? Absolutely. Absolutely you can. And cuts have their place. But when it comes to the finishing blow, what do people use? They use cuts. And a lot of times, if you've got a really skilled blade guy, especially if they're used to working with animals, if they've ever done any hog butchering, where they actually kill an animal with a blade, what will you see them do? They will thrust in and cut across or cut their way out. So they insert the blade first and then they cut across. That's a combination of the two. That's definitely the most superior. If you do that straight thrust into the abdominal aorta and slice all the way down to around their groin or their intestine area, that's a pretty damn good kill. You're going to get a very quick kill out of that. It's the same way for any type of thing. Ripping that blade out, getting that cut as you thrust in, that's going to be the big thing. But as far as just cutting away at somebody versus thrusting at them, the thrust is going to be superior. It has always, historically even, been the finishing blow. You finish them off with a thrust. And why is that? It's just because you can reach the vitals much easier. I tend to break down, I had a discussion at Blade Show about this, I tend to break down your cuts into different manners. Some people use cuts and slashes as subsets of each other. I tend to break them down differently. I have cuts, I have slashes, I have more of a pressure cut. Pressure cut is good for getting to bone. Your cuts tend to be more of a chopping, pushing motion, and your slashes tend to be quick cuts designed to get a few inches in. I use those especially for attacks to the hand and blade-on-blade sparring. Your larger weapon is naturally going to be better for your cuts because it's got longer reach. You can get more blade into it, but certain blades are even designed better for cutting. But overall, if you look from a historical standpoint, your thrust is the better finishing move. It's more likely to get your quick kill. Now, when it comes to using cuts and slashes, my favorite spot, and this is one thing that you don't see a lot of people who don't do blade-on-blade sparring with any sort of headgear on, that they fail at. The best cut or slash tends to be across the face. I love cutting either across the forehead, because if you've ever been cut across the forehead with a really good cut, it bleeds like crazy, and that's going to flow into the eyes, which is going to help my cause. I'm looking to disrupt vision, but ideally I want to get that cut right across the eyes. Yes, right across the eye. That's the best cut, because what's going to happen? It doesn't matter what kind of stress, what kind of adrenaline you got rushing through you or whatever. If you take one to the eye, unless you got a glass eye like my good buddy Morrissey does, shout out to my boy Morrissey. If you get that cut across the eye, it's going to change the game significantly. There's certain responses that person is going to have with a shot to the eye like that. So that's where if you had to go with a winning combo, it would be a quick jab to the eye, and then maybe an overhand arcing shot and down to the subclavian, ripping out. Just certain things like that. Number 2, fixed blade versus a folder. I will say this. I do not care what sort of fancy schmancy folding knife you have. It will never be quicker to deploy than a fixed blade knife. It does not matter. I know everybody's trying to think of something right now that doesn't exist. There's nothing that will come into the game and be ready to use quicker than a fixed blade knife. It's just not going to happen. And yes, there's knives that have the wave feature and their auto opening and switch blades and all stuff like that. I want you to, if you got one on you right now, I want you to open it and be ready to fight. What do you have to do with your hands before you can get it really into action? You have to adjust it. You always have, it doesn't matter what you have, you're going to have to adjust it in your hand. The fixed blade knife, as soon as you get it, all you have to do is pull it out and it's ready to go. It's usually always ready in the hand. The fixed blade is always readily accessible. You can mount them all across your belt. It's the fastest thing to get to. You can get your fixed blade out and into action quicker than you can a folder. That is just always going to happen. The folder does have a place. I always carry a folder. Sometimes I carry several. So if I'm so down on folders, why do I carry folder? Well, I also carry 2 or 3 fixed blades on me as well at different parts on my belt line, but that's a different story. But the folding knife is great for low visibility. Let's say I'm going to the beach. That's my text tone going off. Thanks, my dear wife. If I'm going to the beach and I need to be low vis, if I need to be low vis, I need to be able to take that blade and tuck it into my waistband. I can tuck it into my waistband and keep it very low visibility. So I can walk around. I don't want to walk around with a fixed blade tucked in my waistband. I can't do that while I'm walking around at the beach and have everybody just go, oh shit, this dude's got a damn fixed blade in his belt. No, if you've got a small folding knife there, it just fits right into the equation. It's very easy to conceal. That's one of the great things about the folding knife, is its ability to conceal. You can take it, tuck it right in there, put it at that appendix position, carry it all day long. And I know a lot of guys who are fans of fixed blades, one of the things they knock about folders is the locking mechanism on them. And I'm talking about locking mechanisms failing. Well, there are some really good locks out there. I know that one of the blades that I'm carrying a lot now is the Hisatsu folder from CRKT. And it has a double lock on it. I don't know. I haven't seen that lock perform under stress. However, one of the other blades that I carry is a Cold Steel Spartan. And that blade, I've seen that blade with tension against the lock. I've seen that blade with like 300 pounds hung against the lock, and the lock holds up. So that lock's going to be pretty good. It's not going to fail on me. I know... Yeah, it's just not going to fail. I've used that knife to pry open a door. So, a good quality knife is going to be important. So if you do carry a folding knife, make sure you have a good quality lock on it. But ideally, if you're talking about self-defense, if we're talking about I need to get this blade into play and I need to do some work, you need to have a fixed bladed knife. Number 3, knife to a gunfight. Oh my God, this cliche thing, man. If you've listened to any of my podcasts so far, you're probably thinking, oh my God, he's talking about this again. But I have to drill this home. I have to drill this home all the time with people. Knife to a gunfight. Well, I don't carry a knife because I carry a gun. Well, that's great. That's really fucking great. Congrats to you. I'm glad that you have this new special gun that when you put it on your hip, it creates this force field of impenetrability around you, and nobody can attack you because you carry a gun. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with it. I've said this before, and I will continue saying it until I am blue in the face. Until you can get your gun out. Until you can clear that holster. Point it in the direction of the threat. Put rounds on that threat. Neutralize that threat. It is still a knife fight. It does not become a gunfight until you can get that gun into play. So you should not bring a gun to a knife fight. I always say, with statements like that, it's all about changing the parameters of the fight. I get that with the modern combat archery. Well, what about guns? Why don't you just use a gun? Well, you don't bring a bow to a gunfight. I've heard that bullshit too. And yes, I should not ever bring a gun to a bow fight. I have to change the parameters of the fight. I have to change the parameters of the fight to my benefit. And there's certain benefits that the bow is going to have over the gun. If you've listened to the Modern Combat Archery, you've probably heard me talk about those before. So this idea that there's some sort of invincibility to having a gun is absolutely ridiculous. One of the things that a lot of these people don't really grasp is the aspects of a close conflict. Let's take this for example. Clear example here. You're at your vehicle and you're getting ready to get in your car. You're sitting there, and we're going to take out all the equations of any sort of perception or I was watching my back. We're going to say that today's been a rough day, and you know what? You took a day off. You shouldn't have took a day off in your preparedness and your mental game, but you didn't see the threat coming. So let's throw that out there. You're at your car. You're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. You're thinking about the game tonight. You get in the car, and oh shit, some guy got the drop on you, and he walks up behind you. How quickly can you access your weapons? Let's say, in this same scenario, that the guy does not have his gun out. Let's say that his gun is maybe tucked into his jacket, because it's kind of a crowded area. He doesn't want people to see him wielding a gun and flashing it everywhere. So you could say, well, I'll just punch him in the face. Well, that's great. Okay. We're talking blades here. So getting that blade into action. Can you get that blade into action quicker than you can your gun that's on your hip? Any sort of big movement that you make, say you carry your blade or your gun at the 3 o'clock position or on your strong side hip. Any big move you make like that, guess what? That gun's his gun's. He's already got his hand on his gun, finger on the trigger. He's ready to use it. So can you get that blade out quicker if you're carrying it at that position of, say, like appendix carry? Yes, you can. Minimal movement. If you carry your gun there, you can too, but you don't have to worry about accidentally missing. Let's say also, in the realm of gun versus knife, we're going to take the role of the criminal here. For the criminal, if he's got a blade on you and he's standing within, and I've talked to some of my law enforcement friends about this, if he's standing within this conversational range for most people is quite close. Even if it's 3 feet, he can get that. He already knows what he's going to do. He's got the drop on you. He can get that blade out and be on you in that 3 feet so fast. You're not ever getting that gun out. You're not ever getting that gun out into that fight. And you will be dead before you have the chance to say 1911. So, say if you go for law enforcement guys, let's say 5 feet. 5 feet, man. You know how quickly somebody can cover 5 feet, especially if they know what they're going to do? There's certain things that the officer can do if he's been trained, but in a lot of instances this doesn't happen. You have that infamous Tooler drill where you're at 21 feet. That's actually been pushed to, I believe, 28 feet now from federal law enforcement, according to my law enforcement buddies who's going out for the marshals right now. So they push that distance back. They know how fast the knife guy can get in there. And that's taken into average speed. And that's also a cop who has his gun open carry. How fast do you think you can get your concealed handgun out into play? So factor all that in. The accessibility of the blade is going to outreach that of the gun. There's so many places I can carry the blade and get in there. Plus, there's a psychological thing that's going to happen. Because when you start getting cut and stabbed, you're going to start losing blood. You're going to start seeing blood. You'll start panicking. Blood on your hands. Even if the guy swipes you across the hand and slashes your hand, can you get that gun into play? I don't know. I really don't know. So this whole idea of, oh, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, that's absolutely cliche shit from gun guys who are too lazy to train with blades. Plain and simple. Even if you want to be a gun guy, you better know how to handle that blade. And handling that blade is a lot more than pulling my gun out and shooting them. Trust me on that one. Number 4. Bigger is better. Yes, large knives are better than small knives. I know there's a lot of guys out there that love small knives, and that's wonderful for you. But large knives and I'm thinking in the concept of it doesn't necessarily have to be blade on blade, just in general, a large knife is going to provide more opportunities for me to end the conflict than a smaller knife. If I manage to make it a situation where it becomes blade on blade, I'm going to have the reach advantage with a long knife. Remember I said I favor the distance blade versus, or more of a fencing style versus the, more of the Filipino style of blade work, which those guys also use fencing work. I don't want to say that they don't, but a lot of times, a lot of the work they do is not necessarily based in that range specifically. It's more of a kind of a middle to close range is what I find. That's been my experience. I know not all schools are the same, so guys, don't get pissed about that. But when you're using a smaller blade, the shorter your blade is, the more your reach is compromised. Why do you think in boxing they have such a thing as reach advantage? The same thing applies to knives. If I have a blade that is 12 inches long versus your blade that is 4 inches long, well, guess what? I have an 8-inch reach advantage over you. An 8-inch reach advantage in the boxing world is phenomenal. Now, if you can get inside that range, that's a different story. But then we start talking about the fact of how many people actually want to come inside while you're holding a 12-inch blade straight out in front of them, say at eye level. How many people want to do that? Yeah, there's not a lot, right? I have the ability with a longer blade to keep you at distance while I can take limbs off with it. Longer blades get more edge into the cut. I can take that hand or those fingers right off. It can happen. Take some chicken wings. You got take those chicken wings, wrap them up a little tighter in some meat about finger size, cram them into a leather glove, get a good blade, and you can chop that glove right off. You don't think you can chop a finger off with a good long sharp blade? You are absolutely mistaken. So whenever you're using smaller blades require better empty hand skills to get in the range to use them. It's the same as, like, say, Mike Tyson versus the Lennox Lewis of the past. Mike Tyson, his goal is to get in tight. Lennox Lewis, his goal is to keep him far away. That's the same thing. If you've got a longer blade, you can keep that away. I don't care what the person's skill level is. You push that long blade out in front of them, I guarantee you their thoughts of self-preservation are going to kick in, and they're not going to want to get close to it. I'm sure some guys out there hammering their chest like a gorilla going, oh yeah, I'm not afraid. You will be, trust me. I assure you, it's the same. You see guys talk about not being afraid of a reach advantage until they start getting popped with a jab by a guy who's got just a 4-inch reach advantage. They start getting popped in the head with that jab, and then their whole idea of moving in changes dramatically. So the same thing's going to happen with a blade, except with lethal consequences. With that longer blade, you can keep that person at distance. You can make them afraid to close in. People just... I have found it, man, when I've knife sparred with guys, even when we're using the same size blade, you'll get these guys, especially who are really skilled with things like karambits, and which I'm not a fan of karambits in the least bit. They look cool, but very limited in their application. You get guys that use karambits or like a reverse edge, and they'll want to knife spar with you, and you've got your blade, that's the same length, but you're using it in a forward grip and keeping them at a long distance range. You chop those guys to pieces. You chop those guys to pieces. You just simply using range. So a longer blade is going to be your better bet. Plus, your longer blade can reach those vitals a lot easier. It becomes a game in the same way that they learn that it's much better for me to cut you or stab you and not get cut or stabbed myself. Just makes sense. So, go with a longer blade. And you can carry short blades as well. I carry short blades too, but I always have a long blade on me. And by long blade, I'm not necessarily talking about a 12-inch blade. I'm talking about something with a 6-inch and above blade, because that's going to typically be longer, even just by 2 or 3 inches, than the average knife that most people carry. Number 5, knife duels do exist. I know people are shocked. Oh, knife duels don't exist. You never see knife on knife. Well, okay. Granted, two guys do not say to themselves, at least not in this country, they don't say, we shall meet at noon. I will bring my knife and you bring yours, and we will fight to the death. No, you don't have that sort of thing happen. That doesn't happen. Gone are those days. People barely fist fight anymore. However, if you are attacked by a guy with a blade, and you can employ your empty hand skills to control that blade momentarily to get space or a moment in time, that's when you bring your blade into play. And that is especially where something like a fixed blade becomes far superior, because you can get that fixed blade out very quickly. One of the things we practice when the crew that I practice my martial arts with, we practice blade work. We'll practice parrying that thrust out, checking the elbow as we're drawing our fixed blade, and it happens very quick. Almost in an instant. So it quickly becomes blade on blade. It's not going to be blade on blade to start with. Just the same way as a gunfight is not going to be gun on gun to start with. Usually it's going to be a bad guy getting the drop on you, and then you either make space, take cover, whatever, to get your gun into play. And remember, one gun is a massacre, 2 guns is a gunfight. So that's the same attitude you have to have when it comes to blades. Let me take a sip of my Mitacon here real quick. Oh, man, that's some good stuff. So you create space, you even the odds, and you get this idea, too, with people. They say, I don't worry about training that because knife attacks don't happen that way on the street. And that's true. They say, well, what do you do if a guy walks up behind you and grabs you by the jacket and slips a knife out and stabs you 3 times? Well, you get stabbed 3 times. It's the same as when guys used to ask me, well, we would practice gun disarms or gun defense, and they would say, what happens if the guy walks across the street up behind you and shoots you in the back of the head? My response was always, you die that day. And there's no counter to an assault. That's the whole purpose of the assault. The bad guy always has the advantage. He's a step ahead of you because he knows what he's going to do. You do not know what he is going to do. So he always has that step ahead. Now, there's certain things you can do to even those odds. But as far as saying, well, if the guy walks to me and just starts stabbing me, I'm not going to be able to get my knife out. Yes, you're correct. You're probably not going to be able to get anything out. You're going to have to use your empty hand skills, hoping he hasn't got anything vital or that you can live long enough to change the game of that fight. There's no counter technique to an assault. There's not one. You get assaulted. You can change the game before you die or before you're seriously injured, but as far as how do I defend against an assault, you don't. You don't defend against an assault. You either stop it beforehand or you make time during to change the manner of that assault into an actual fight. So knife duels do exist. The whole idea is that you're going to have to use your empty hand skills to get your weapon into play, whatever it may be. Number 6, it's more than just stabbing. I ask guys, I'll say, tell me, that knife you have, how exactly would you use that in a fight if you had to defend yourself with a blade? And I get a ton of people that say, I don't know. Thor's blessing me right now with his storms and lightning from above. Hail, Thor! We get lovely weather during the summertime here in the South, let me tell you. But it's more than just stabbing. You have to know that anatomy. You have to know where to put that blade. You have to know where to cut. You need to understand that when I thrust here, I'm aiming for this. When I cut here, I'm aiming for this. there's a concept of knife stopping power that a lot of people don't really think about. Knife stopping power can occur from bleeding, or it can occur from severing things that have to be surgically repaired. Bleeding takes a long time. In some cases, depending on, this is one of the reasons a lot of guys, I know SIOC has their vital template, which targets vital parts on the body to get quicker bleeding out, and that's great. And I actually am a very big fan of the templates that they use. But I'm also a fan of knife stopping power, meaning when I parry out that blade, when I pass it to the inside, I slash the tendon connecting the tricep into the elbow. Because what happens there when that tendon is severed with a nice pressure cut so I can get a good deep shot? What happens when that occurs? What does the tricep do? The tricep extends out, right? You know what your tricep does. If you're doing tricep pushdowns, if you guys work out, if you don't work out, you should be doing tricep pushdowns. What happens when I sever that tendon? What can that arm no longer do? I've taken away that motion. What happens when I sever the tendons in the forearm that control grip? All of a sudden that hand can't really hold on to anything. And the same thing happens when you start understanding exactly what happens when things get cut. Even if it's just a cut to the hand. If you've ever cut your hand, which I cut mine recently, so what was my response? It's the same response as everyone else. You jerk your hand away from that which just cut you. You jerk it far away. Right? So what happens if I understand this about the psychological response to that cut? I know I'm going to get a lot of bleeding, so that blood is gonna mess with them, and I didn't even get that super deep of a cut. I know I'm going to get bleeding, so once I get that bleeding, I know they're going to pull their hand away. Well, guess what that opens? That opens shots down the middle. If I chop a finger off, it gets even worse. If I cut the hand, do a snap cut to the hand that is actually holding the blade, all that blood's going to get in the hand. It's going to make it very difficult to hold that knife. These are all the things you learn. You learn what's the best places to attack. Where do I cut? Where's that femoral artery? How do I sever? I do a thing where I teach guys, I talk about there's no submission hold you can't cut your way out of. I'm sure the jiu-jitsu guys are going, what? But yes, it's true. One of the things I show people for a rear naked choke, if a guy's got your back and he's got both hooks in, you manage to get that blade out, that appendix position, you're protecting your neck, and you grab those toes and you pull that leg up to your midline, and you put that blade against their Achilles tendon, and you slice that bad boy. And guess what? They're going to let go of that hook. They're not going to use that hook anymore, and you can just cut your way completely out of submission. They're trying to go for that. They're trying to go for that choke around your neck. You grab those fingers, you peel it off, and you put that blade in there, and you slice that hand wide open. These are all things that start happening that you start doing with these blades, and this is the difference. This is where guys get into the sport concept where they're like, "Well, I'm just gonna take them down." No, you're not. You're gonna take me down. Maybe you get me down, but guess what? I'm gonna plunge this blade right into your kidney every time. Oh, yeah. Good, Mighty-Con, good, Mighty-Con. So, once you understand the ideas behind knife stopping power, especially if you've ever done any work with animals, or you've butchered your own animals, like an adult male should know how to do, you start realizing that a lot of these timetables of death, and even people who've explored them, it's kind of bullshit. Things bleed out very differently. Some things bleed out dramatically. Some things bleed out a little longer than others. So it's very important to understand the anatomy of how a blade works. Number 7, empty hand versus blade. Now this is probably going to be a bit controversial for people, but please bear with me. The idea of knife tapping. Knife tapping, man. I understand the drills, a lot of the drills that you see with knife tapping. I see the guys tapping blades, and it'll be a long, drawn-out drill, a counter to a counter to a counter. And I understand that. I tend to find that when I practice empty hand versus blade, the tap becomes quite literally just a moment in time. I parried that blade, and I control it just for a second, and that person is usually jerking back, moving very quickly, moving very far away from me. The danger I find in tapping drills is it installs this concept of these patterns. So for instance, if there's a number 1 cut and I'm used to tapping that, and then a number 2 cut comes after that, if that drill gets ingrained into your head, you have to be careful that you don't become locked in this preset of movements. Almost kind of like a kata in a way. If you change up, or let's say, I don't want to use kata, but let's say in boxing, if I constantly drill how to block a jab cross hook, if somebody changes it up and throws a jab cross jab or a jab cross uppercut, if I'm constantly drilling that, and if it's always drilling that, this is the response to this sequence. If I'm constantly drilling that, the problem becomes that I start to anticipate that as the next movement. You have to be very careful of that. Most guys that are higher up in tapping, they understand this, but a lot of guys starting out don't quite get that. They don't get the fact that this is a moment in time. Me, what I have found in general is, as far as effectiveness goes, I tend to find that a tap to a check to overwhelming strikes tends to be the best move for me. You know, check, do a tap on the an inward tap, check the elbow, right cross, right down the middle. Those tend to be the better things for me, because a lot of blade guys specifically get very caught up in what they're doing. You get a lot of guys that look into locking limbs up. There's a school out there. I used to be the red zone that would do like a 2-on-1. That's great until the guy switches hands. The same thing applies for tapping. When you get guys switching hands and everything on you, man, that changes the game dramatically. For me, tapping tends to be a moment in time. Very much a moment in time. And I'm sure there's other colleague guys that would agree with this. But my experience with it is when I have done knife drills with guys, even guys who are really good at the Filipino martial arts, when I go outside of their pattern in a fast motion, they usually cannot stop those attacks at that range. Once you get inside that range, it becomes a dead man's game. Then you start factoring in length of blade and all that, plus the forward pressure. All of these things start coming into effect. I know there are schools out there who have started to remedy this problem, and I applaud you. I applaud you. I've been waiting to see schools start to do this. But you get a lot of this locking limbs where guys are like, I'm going to grab the hand and do a wrist. No, you're not. You're not going to be able to do it, because the guy's going to switch hands. He's going to switch hands. He's going to punch you in the face with his other hand. That's the reality of what is going to happen. And then, of course, as I said, you get your jiu-jitsu guys. I'll take them down. I'll bite. No, you're not. You're not going to do that, because once you do, as soon as you hit the ground, we're not playing jiu-jitsu here, motherfucker. We're not playing UFC. We're not playing any of this other MMA bullshit. We're not playing that. We're playing stab you until you stop moving. So you take me down, even if you get mount on me and punch me in the face, guess what? Boom, boom, boom. I stab you until you're dead. Right there from the bottom. So don't get into this game. There's a reason, as I spoke about in the martial mastery episode, there's a reason that guys did not go to the ground as much in olden days, in the traditional martial arts days, because those were about times when people carried weapons, and they knew what would happen if a blade got into play down there. So like I said, I tend to find the best strategy versus a blade is striking. Groin kicks, locking a limb momentarily to strike the leg, headbutt the face. It all needs to be moments in time. And this is why I always stress to people to work on developing a good strike, a good striking game, a good hard punch, just hands of granite. As it storms down as I'm doing this podcast, Thor is speaking to me, and the power of Mjolnir should be in your fist. You should be able to strike with the power of Mjolnir every time you hit someone with your fist. That's the idea you need to have, and you need to cultivate that. You need to be able to move. You need to be able to lock that limb down. Don't get caught up in the fact of, oh, I've got them trapped. No, because even if you check that limb across their body, guess what? All they got to do is back up. Take a step back, and they're back in the fight again. So you need to be able to check it. Boom, boom, boom. Just overwhelming punches. Change the game completely. Locking that limb momentarily so you can use those strikes. So, and that empty hand becomes important, especially if you're a gun guy or a knife guy, because that's going to be the first line of defense till you can get that weapon into play. Number 8 is you need to own a good blade. There's a lot of good things on the market. I'm a fan of Cold Steel because they have a nice video thing that you can get for free called Proof, where they show you how good their blades are. I see it in action. I mean, people, oh, I hate Lynn Thompson, he's an asshole. You know what? That's fine. I don't care. I don't give a shit about what Lynn Thompson is. I give a shit about his products. And I see his products put to the test, and they work. They come sharp. If you're not good at sharpening blades, they already come sharpened, so you don't have to do any more work to get them sharpened. They're not expensive. To get a good fixed blade knife, they have one of my favorite blades that is a fucking razor is the Cold Steel Peacekeeper? I think it's called the Peacekeeper. It's either Peacekeeper or Peacemaker. You can get them on eBay for about $25-$30, and it's a fixed blade knife. It is razor sharp. Yes, it has a thin blade, but it has a thin, flexible blade that is solid. I've seen it put to the test. It's a solid blade. It is a razor. It's one of those blades that you play with it, man, and it is just scary sharp. And it comes that way. All of their blades come this way, so you don't have to worry about putting an edge on them. I'm starting to become a fan of CRKT's Hisatsu series. Their Hisatsu folders, their Hisatsu, the fixed blade Hisatsu. I love that. Their big blade, the Hisho. Man, I'm going to have one of those pretty soon as well. But custom blades, I'm not a fan of expensive custom blades. And the reason being is that if I have to use it, it's going to get confiscated. Even if I'm in the right, it's going to get confiscated, and I'm not going to get it back. So don't spend a ton of money on your blades, but you can get quality without spending an arm and a leg. You need to have a good sharp blade. It needs to be sharp. It needs to be able to take the hair off your arm. You should be able to hold a piece of paper up and just slice pieces off, no problem, all day long. If you could do that, your blade is ready. It's ready. Plus, having a good, strong blade means if I go to stab the person and I miss something, maybe I hit a wall or whatever, I'm not going to break my blade. People carry these cheap blades, and you know what? You get what you pay for. If you pay $5 for a knife, you're going to get $5 worth of work out of it. Plain and simple. Can it kill? Yes, it can kill. Of course it can kill. I got a pencil sitting right here. It can kill. But the fact of the matter is you want to have confidence that your blade is going to work when you need it. Number 9. Okay, guys, we had to cut the episode a little short, but if you'd like to hear the rest of the information regarding the world of Bladecraft, please check out our website at thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com, or you can check out our brand new official website of thebarbarianlounge.com. Yes, new website is up and available. You can go there, you can check out products, some of the things we're offering there, and that site will be updated weekly, so please check it out, subscribe there, and catch up on past episodes, future episodes, and stay tuned for the new information we got coming. But for now, fellow barbarians, the lounge is closed.
My name is S.M. Gibson.